Hello everybody, my name is Derek and you are watching Getting Started with VBA. Let me start by introducing myself real quick. I've been programming on and off for about 20 years now, been using VBA heavily for about 9 years. Why am I starting with VBA? I think that this is honestly a very friendly programming language for new programmers. I also feel that it's a lot more powerful than people give it credit for. It can automate just about everything it can automate everything you do in Excel and other Office programs and help you work different Office programs together. So for instance, if you're doing something with VB or with data in Excel, you can go ahead and output a report to a Word document as an example. So there's a lot of power to it and a lot of good things that you can do with it. Just to whet your appetite a little bit, to show you what we'll be covering and some of the information that we'll be going over, just want to give you an idea of what VBA can do here real quick. Right here we have just a very basic blank document. I've written some code that does a few different things, put some colors on there and some numbers on there. And toward the end of this video, I'll show you exactly how this all works and we'll step through all of it. Just gonna run that here and we end up with colored boxes and some numbers. So again, we'll go into the details exactly how to do that yourself, and you'll get a good level of knowledge for creating your own programs. So let's get started. First off, let me clear this out. And by default, you will not have this developer tab up on your ribbon. So to get that, all you'll need to do is right click anywhere on the ribbon and select customize the ribbon and come down here and select developer. And when you do that, that developer tab will appear up there. So just to show you here real quick, I'll unclick it, developer tab disappears. So we're to the normal spot for Excel loading, and go ahead and click that again, and developer tab will appear for you. So let's get into the workspace. Go over here to the developer tab, click on Visual Basic Editor, and I'm going to bring that up here from my other screen. And we'll just go ahead and put that over here, put Excel over here, and we'll get into it. By tradition, we always start with a Hello World program. Anytime we're learning a new programming language, Hello World gets you the core of what you need to know to run a program and let you expand from there. So here we have our code window. We have sub hello in here and then end sub. We are indenting this. Now, VBA does not care if you indent or not. Some languages do, VBA does not. So it is still a good idea to indent things as you're going in. So if I had different loops and things like that in here, I'd indent further for each step that I take. So for our Hello World program, we are simply doing a message box. That's what MSG BOX stands for. And Hello World. We're putting that in a string. That's why there's quotation marks here. And we're wrapping that in parentheses. Again, VBA is very flexible in the way that you do things. So by that, I mean that you can do this like this. And if you've programmed in other languages, this is going to be very comfortable for you to do. And you'll come up with Hello World. However, if you do not want to put the parentheses in there, you don't have to. And again, you can run that and you'll get the same result. Now, the way I ran that, came up here, hit play, and it ran for me. I can also pause a program in the middle, and I can go ahead and stop a program. Going up here, let's go through the menu items a little bit before we get into these other windows. Of course, we have the file menu. This is where you can go to import and export files and remove a module altogether. You got your basic edit menu. That's your copy, paste, delete, indent, outdent, etc. You got your view window, and that lets you get into different aspects of the coding environment. So by default, we got these few windows down here that you may notice that on yours, you don't have those. But if you want those, then you can simply click Locals window or Watch window for those to appear. And we'll go over what those are in just a few moments. You also got Project Explorer and Properties window. And then you also have Object Explorer. Object Explorer takes the place of your code window here. We'll look at that again in just a moment. In fact, let's actually just do that now. And what you'll notice in here is that you have all sorts of different objects, and you can select any of them and see what goes under each item. So if I wanted to do, for instance, chart, I can see that members of chart I can activate it, I can do application, I can do auto scaling, and as I click on each item, it's going to give me a little bit more information on all of that, and I can click for even more information. So if you're trying to find something and you're not quite sure what you're looking for, this is a really good place to go. So you can toggle between those using the F2 and F7 keys. F2 to get to the object browser, F7 to get back to your code. So we'll do that. Now continuing on with the menu items, we got Format. This is for aligning. This is going to be helpful when we get into forms, and that'll be in a later video. I won't be covering forms very much in this video. Debug. This is going to be a great go-to item as you are trying to work through your code and find out why things are happening the way they are. It allows you to step through each item. It also allows you to clear breakpoints and jump to breakpoints. We'll get more into debugging in a little bit as well. Run, these are the same buttons that you just saw up here. Play, pause, stop. And then we also have design mode. Tools, add-ins, window, and help are pretty much your standard items. Windows, just like split tile horizontally, where you can put everything in here, all of your open code items. We're not going to do that right now. Tools, this gets into a little bit more advanced items. It's not really something that you'll use initially as you start out. So, going around the horn, we got our project window, Project Explorer. This lets you see what's inside of your project. Any open workbooks or open add-ins will be in here. So we have VBA project funcres.xlam. We also have ATP VBAEN.xls. As you look at these other items, if you have anything like that in there, sometimes you'll be able to click into it and see the structure. Other times you'll be prompted for a password. That kind of goes into that add-ins window up here, where you can do things with passwords. Coming down here, we have forms, and we also have modules. Modules are where your code sits in order to manipulate the program in any way that you see fit. Forms are for user forms. So an example of a form is Excel or this Explorer, whatever it is that you use. In here, you can go ahead and create your own forms however you want to. You'll have your properties window in here. This is where you can see each item, and you can go ahead and change things. So I have a drop down here. It shows me my options as far as keeping the scroll bars visible. I have scroll height, I have startup position, and anything I can change here, I can also change in code. Now you'll notice that when I change from the form being highlighted or selected to the button being selected, you'll see this properties window change, and then I have the properties of that button. And again, I can go in here and I can change things. The caption I had changed previously to hello. If I wanted to change that to goodbye, I can. So that shows you that. Down here we got our locals window. Locals shows you what is currently going on in your code and anything that is currently being used as far as variables or objects. VBA is an object-oriented programming language. So what that means is think of a language of boxes of boxes of boxes. Some boxes can go inside of each other, other ones can't, and you can connect boxes together. So that's one way of looking at object-oriented programming. Your watches window allows you to focus in on something specific. So if there is a variable, which we'll get into variables here in a little bit as well, that you want to keep an eye on, or a value in a cell that you want to keep an eye on, you can go ahead and do anything like that with watches. Immediate window is something where you can go in and you can execute a line of code to see what happens. So for instance, if I do message box and I do hello world and I hit enter on that, I get a message box that says hello worlds. Now if I do another message box and say howdy and I hit enter on that, I only get howdy. I don't get the next line. Same thing is true where if I start on hello world, I only get the hello world, whatever line I'm on, and then I can execute it again. All right, so let's go into functions. All right, so subs and functions. A sub is void. It means it does not return anything. A function, a return value is always expected. So when you declare a function, you're going to say this function is an integer, or it's a string, or something like that. Now, that gets more into variables, but in order to talk about functions, we need variables, and variables talk about functions. So we need to start with one, then we'll move on to the other. Let's talk a little bit more about breakpoints and debugging your code. So to start things off, my favorite keys when debugging are F5 and F8. F5 because it lets me jump to a place in my code, and F8 because it lets me go step by step. So to show you that, I'm going to go ahead and start in this main sub. That's where my cursor is, so that's where my program starts. If I started down here, it would try to start in this area. It would give me an error on that. In fact, if I do that, it actually does not even try to do it. But let me just double check here. Yep, does not do that. And the reason for that, again, is because it has it requires a variable to be passed in, and that's not happening here. So I will start up here with main sub. I just hit F8 and that starts there. And I'm saying, let's go down to sub 1. So I'm going to go to sub 1. It goes, okay. Now I'm going to come down here and I'm going to declare or dimension a variable. And I'm going to say that it is an integer. I'm going to set that variable to the number 2. And then I'm going to call sub 2. and I'm going to pass that var1 with it. All right, now I'm just going to go ahead and just to show you a breakpoint, I'm toggling a breakpoint right here. Instead of going line by line, where if I hit F8, I would go here, and then here, and then here. Instead, I'm going to just hit F5, so I go ahead and land right on this. And so I do that. That allows me to jump around in my code. So if I know I got a chunk of code that works fine, I want to jump to an area that I know might be problematic, I can do that very easily. And I can go ahead and set as many breakpoints as I want, anywhere I want. And then if need be, I can just come up here, and with debug, I can go ahead and clear all breakpoints. That works just fine. Now, we're getting into functions. Again, that requires a return value. So I need to set my var, or I need to have a variable to set that value to, or I need to put it somewhere. That could be inside of Excel. I just need to do something with it. So here I am calling func1, and I'm passing it the value of 2. All right, so now if I look at this and I hover over it, I will see var1 equals 2. I'm redeclaring that that is an integer. I'm saying, hey, I'm passing you an integer, and I want you to treat it as an integer, okay? And I'm saying that it is going to return an integer. So continuing on, I'm also saying that func1, the value of func1, is going to be whatever the value of func2 is. I don't know what that is, so I'm going to jump on down here, not passing anything. I'm just going to have func2 tell me what its value is. In here, I'm saying func2 is equal to 3. Right now, it's equal to 0. I go ahead and hit F8 and highlight that again, and now it's equal to 3. Therefore, func1 is also equal to 3. Now you'll notice that I came down the chain. Now I'm going back up the chain. I need to close each item, and that becomes important as you get into repeating and going deeper and deeper into code. Can become important for that. So those are subs and functions for you. Next thing we're going to cover is going to be variables. We touched on this very briefly. Now we're going to go ahead and take a little bit deeper dive into it. First thing you'll want to know about variables is how to name them. What's valid, what's not valid. Different languages have different rules. In VBA, the variable must be less than 255 characters. You cannot have spaces. It needs to be, or it cannot begin with the number, has to be a letter, or an underscore. I believe an underscore will work. Let's try that out. Come down here. If we say dim, actually, let's test what Microsoft said about variables and put a number in there and see if it gives me an error. It does. It says, hey, I can't do that. I am curious, however, I have not tried this in VBA, if I can go ahead and use an underscore. So let's take a look. Nope, it does not like that either. So it has to be a letter that you start with. You can, however, have an underscore in the variable name. And it likes that just fine. Now you'll notice if you write a piece of code that VBA does not like, that it can't read, it tells you right away. So it's not something where you're going to write 100 lines of code or 1,000 lines of code and then have to go through all of it and find syntax errors. You can still run into logical errors, like if you added when you were supposed to subtract, that type of a thing, but generally speaking, you're not going to run into any syntax errors. All right. So up here we have option explicit. And with option explicit, what that is referring to is that says any variable I use, I have to name it first. I have to give it a name. So I can't come down here and just say my var equals 1. When I run that code, it's going to be upset with me. In fact, I'll just show you that. It says variable not defined. Okay, so I can't do that. If, however, I take out that option explicit requirements, it is going to have no issues with it at all. It says it'll reset my project because I did that. So let's go back down here, and yeah, it has no issues with that. It is totally fine. Option explicit, it's a good idea to use. That way you don't have to worry about mistyping something. So if I had, I declared public var up here, and if I mistyped it and typed something like that instead, it would tell me in there that it was not acceptable. So I'll go ahead and do that here. And again, if I go ahead and try running that, it's going to tell me that that is not okay. So public and private. Public allows the variable to be read and manipulated outside of the module. So here, over here, we have our modules, and I have public var. And so if I go into another module like down here, I can go ahead and see public var, and I don't get any kind of an error message at all. So if I run that, it never took that piece of code out. So let's do that here real quick. All right, if I run that, it goes, okay, yep, I can do public var. Now you'll notice that I have option explicit commented out up here. Therefore, it's going to be fine with private var. It doesn't care, but it's going to be empty. Whereas when I went through that init sub that I called, I actually had set it to 1. So that means that it's understands private var, but it only understands it in the context or in the scope of this sub, or this sub specifically. It does not understand it in the context or scope of it being over here. Now, if I did dim or dimension, dim var, in this case as integer, this again cannot be seen by another module. Only if you just define it as public can it be seen in another module. One other thing that you can do here is to see what variables there are. And this is why it's a nice thing to declare it public, private, and keep track of that so that you're not manipulating things that you don't want to manipulate. If I said mod2 vars 1, which is the name of that other function, and I put a dot there, I can see the things that are available to me are a sub, which is that init sub, and that variable, which is public var. So I believe I can actually even set that to 2. Let's take a look at that. So right now that public var is 1, and now it is 2, because I went ahead and changed it to that, even though I'm outside of that module. All right. So lastly, as far as scope goes, and that's what we're talking about here, what can be seen where. Lastly is dimensioning a variable inside of a sub or function, and when you do that, it can only be seen within that sub or function. So it can only be seen in the context that you've dimensioned it and below. All right. And if I were to declare a variable in here and pass it somewhere else, it can be seen by another function then. But if I don't pass it, then it can't be seen. So next item, let's talk a little bit about variable types. I have a list in here that goes over that information. One thing to bear in mind when you're declaring variables is size. You want it to be large enough. You want the box to be big enough and the right shape to hold what you need it to hold. But at the same time, you don't want it to be so big that you just don't need it. It'd be like taking a box for a washing machine and putting a little children's toy inside of it, like a little action hero or toy soldier or that type of a thing in it. It just wouldn't make sense, and then shipping that. Whereas all you really needed was a little box for the children's toy. So the reason for that is because of memory. Now, in these days, you don't have to worry as much about memory because we have super fast computers that we did not have many years ago, where memory was a concern. If you've seen Apollo 13, for instance, there is an interesting example of this, but more in the context of power, where if they did things in the wrong order, then things crashed out. As a matter of fact, we actually have more memory and processing power in the phones that we carry around today than what it took to put a man on the moon. So interesting bit of trivia there. Variable types. We have byte. Byte takes up 1 byte. You can put in that box anything from the number 0 to the number 255. Integer is a little bit bigger. I like to use integer, as you've seen. You can go from negative 32,768 to positive 32,767. The problem with this, though, is if you start dealing with numbers that are in the 100,000 range, if you're adding up numbers or something like that, working in integer can be a problem then. So then you might want to go into long if it's not going to be a decimal value. If it is going to be a decimal value, you may want to look at single or double. Single takes up 4 bytes, double takes up 8, and actually currency takes up 8 also. So just depending on what you're looking to do will depend on which you choose to use. Next, there are non-numeric types. So I have a little demo in here for you about string fixed and string variable. String fixed lets you set the length of the string, but there's a limit on that to 65,400 characters. Depending on what you're doing will depend on if you want to take advantage of that. Nice thing about setting the limit is that you don't have any overhead to manage that string. Whereas with the variable length string, you have whatever the length of the string is plus 10 bytes. I personally normally use variable length string. I don't normally do a fixed length string. And here's why. With a fixed length string, I'm going to declare this string and I'm going to give it a length of 10 spots, 10 spaces, or 10 characters. And I am going to set the string to all of this. This goes way beyond 10 characters. And it will let me. It has no problem with that at all. However, notice when I do that and I hover over here, it cuts off at that 783 mark. So basically it put that string in there right here, and then it said, okay, I am done. I'm not going any further because you haven't allowed me to go any further. If on the other hand, I come down here and I do the exact same thing, except I don't give it a length. I don't say that it is only 10 characters or 100 or 1,000. As a matter of fact, a variable length string can be up to 2 billion characters, and I have never seen anything that has 2 billion characters. I would be curious about that bit of trivia, but that is outside the scope of this video, so I will leave that to your discretion if you wish to look that up. But again, here with this string, if I hover over it, it stored the whole string all the way out to LKJ9, and I could go much, much further than that if I wanted to. Now, when we look at Boolean, Boolean's a weird one. In some languages, Boolean is 1 bit. A bit is 1/8 of a byte. So a bit is a 1 or a 0. A byte is 8 bits, and then it goes off from there into kilobit, kilobyte, megabit, megabyte, etc. But in VBA, a Boolean is actually 2 bytes, and those 2 bytes can either contain the word true or the word false, and that's all that it can contain. Date takes up 8 bytes. It is not something that you want to use if you ever do anything where you have to keep track of dates from prior to January 1st of the year 100. Only reason that you would want to do that is if you're writing about prehistoric times, Old Testament times, time of Jesus, that kind of a thing. But you'd want to pick something else like a string or something like that. Now, what a range does is it allows you to keep track of a bunch of cells. So each one of these is a cell. This is also a range. So it depends on what you want to call it in Excel. Excel understands both terms. So if I wanted to select this single range, I can. If I wanted to hold the control key and select an additional range, I can. If I want to add a third range, and I can store all of this in one range variable. In fact, we'll take a look at how the range variable works in just a few minutes here as well. Object is any embedded object. This one is interesting. If we wanted to store a worksheet, in other words, I wanted to remember this sheet right here, and so I'm going to say active worksheet, whatever I'm on, and I'm going to say active workbook, which is going to be VBA basics because that's what's open right now. And so, and I can also explicitly say this stuff. I can say, look at this specific file, or look at this sheet inside of here. And I'll show you how to do that in a few minutes as well. Now, I have set this WS and WB variables as worksheet and workbook variables. However, an object variable is more of like a catch-all. So different objects can go inside of that. So we'll see that here where it says set object var to WS. And let's actually expand out this locals area a little bit further just to show you this. And right now, object var value is nothing. It just knows that it's an object. But once I hit F8 here, it goes, okay, I am still an object, but now I'm a sheet also. And I'm a special type of object. And if I do that again, it goes, I am still an object, but now I am this workbook, this specific workbook. And it understands that, and you're able to do that with object. Last item is variant. Variant is kind of a catch-all variable. It is what VBA defaults to when it doesn't know what else to default to. It also requires it on one type of a loop that I'll show you in a few minutes. And if you're wondering what a loop is, what I'm talking about there, stick around and we will get to that very shortly as well. Moving on from there, let's talk about arrays. So I actually got a great analogy today on a way to think of an array. An array is like a train. So At the front of the train, you got the name of the array, and it's pulling everything behind it. So an array is that box, but all of the other boxes or containers that are attached to it. When you declare an array, you can give it a specific size. In this case, when you do it in VBA, keep in mind all arrays start at the number 0. When you give it a size, when you put 4 here, it is not saying I am going to reserve 4 spaces. It is saying the maximum value that I can have is 4. So you actually have 5 spots when you do this. So as I step through this code, I'm just setting the array, and we can watch that down here as 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now if I try to do this and I try to assign 5 to that, it's not going to add an additional line here. It's just going to give me an error message and say the script is out of range and it can't do that. So what can we do there? How can we resolve that if we want to have an array expand? I've had this situation before where I don't know how big I need my array to be, so I picked something somewhat conservative, and I said, hey, if I need to get bigger, go ahead and just add another 500 on there, or 5,000, or whatever it was that I picked. And here's how I did that. So this time, instead of right at the beginning saying my array is going to be up to the 4th index, I'm just going to say it's an array. The way I do that is I do my variable name, I wrap it in parentheses, and say it is an integer array. And now I use this redimension, and I say, I want you to redimension that array so that the highest spot is 4. And it goes, okay, I can do that. Now, whereas before, if I did this, in fact, if I highlight it right here, you'll see that it says subscript out of range. I can also, incidentally, add this to my watches. I can right click and do add watch, and it confirms it, tells me that it's in the procedure redim demo in the module mod3r2, and I hit OK, and again it says subscript out of range. But watch as I continue on here, and I've not executed this code, I'm just on it, and now the value there is 0. I'm no longer getting subscript out of range. I can go ahead and assign a value there, and I'm going to. Now the value is 5 because I redimensioned the array. Moving on from here, I want to look at operators. Now, operators are familiar to people who have gone to elementary school and beyond. So it starts with the very basics, simply plus, minus, multiply, divide, and mod or modulus. Mod is something where people hear it and they're like, I don't know what that is. But you've been working with it since probably around 2nd grade when you were learning division. And the mod operator is simply the remainder. So when you do that, it's just going to, if I go 3 mod 2, as I'm showing here, it is going to say, okay, excellent. 3 divided by 2 is 1, and the remainder is 1. No problem. Now, if I go down further, we'll get into equality operators. And equality, again, this should be relatively familiar, going back to middle school math class and high school math, etc., and even, again, elementary school. So here we're saying 3 is equal to 2. No, it's not. So that is going to be false. And so let's actually just run this code, and we'll just enter, 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 enter. All right, so this is what we're on right now. We are on 3 equals 2. That is false, and that's actually what gets returned. So you actually get a Boolean return on comparison operators. And so same thing here. If I were to do 3 does not equal 2, that is true. And 3 is greater than 2 is true. 3 is less than 2 is false. Yep, there it is. Okay. Getting ahead of myself here. 3 is greater than or equal to 2 is true, and 3 is less than or equal to true is false. All right, getting down here, concatenation operators. What concatenation operators do is it takes 2 items and puts them together. Here's the catch. The plus sign can be used both for concatenation and adding things together. So if I were to go ahead and say 3 plus 2, as I'm doing here, you'll see that it says 5. If I put 2 strings together here and I say var plus eable, I will come up with a variable. All right. Now, those are my last 2 items. By the way, one other thing I'm going to show you real quick with debugging is if you want to put a whole bunch of things in comments and you don't want to sit there and do a comment character in front of each one. By the way, these apostrophes here are comment characters. I did not cover that yet. But you can go ahead and just highlight all of it, and you can come up here to your toolbar and you can do comment block. And it'll just comment all of it. Or you can go ahead and uncomment and it undoes it. So I'm going to comment all of that. And then I'm going to run this code again so that we can see these bottom 2 items. I'm actually going to add one more item to this though first. And I'm going to do message box just to show you what happens. If I wrap that 3 plus 2 that gave me 5 before in a string, and I add those together, it should give me 32. So let's find out if it does. It does. So that gave me 32. Ampersand is the other concatenation operator. And again, different things, different meanings depending on your language. Ampersand means something totally different, for instance, in Java and JavaScript. But in here, it is concatenation. We got 32 and then also var 2. Because one of the items is a string, it goes, okay, I can deal with that, and I will put those 2 together. And actually, if you tried to put a plus sign in there, it would crash out on you. You get an error message. And the reason for that is because it doesn't know what to do. VBA doesn't quite know how to handle that. So I prefer to use the ampersand personally for when I'm doing things. Next item on the agenda here is decisions. The power of programming is that you can make decisions. You can get to a point and you can say, okay, I don't know what to do here. Let's look at the information I've been given on how to handle this situation and then move forward. So decisions, you got a few different ways that you can do them. The first way is actually not listed up here right now. Sub if then, but I will put that here real quick and we'll write it out. So I'm going to say if and I'm going to say condition equals true, and then do something, else if cond equals false, then do something else, do something else, and when you're all done, end if. And it'll go through and do all of that for you. Now, the other way that you can do that is if you want to use a select case statement. And this is kind of a shorthand if you have a lot of different items. So you don't have to do if, else if, else if, else if, else if, and then a default case. So instead, you have a variable up here, and you say select case, whatever the variable name is, and you say if the variable is equal to these values, anywhere from 1 to 5, do something. If it's equal to 6 or 8, do something. Otherwise, if you can't find any matches to any of that, just do this instead. And else is always your default case, or what to do when you can't figure out what else to do. And then again, you wrap that all in end select. So we've gone through a lot of different items. Only thing we haven't covered yet is loops, and I'm going to cover that now with you. What we will be able to do now is put a lot of this information together and also see some other fun things that we can do. So with loops, we are going to start up here, and this is the exact same code that I had before. I had this block commented out, which simply resets all of it. But just to show you here real quick, if I go ahead and run that, I can have all of that show up just like I did before. And I can go ahead and uncomment this block that resets all of it. And I'll do that. And I'm going to run it again. And it ran it all, and then it cleared it all out. Let's step through it a little bit at a time. First of all, in my initial attempt to write all this, I went ahead and created a var variable. I'm really not using that anywhere, so I'm going to take that out. And let's go ahead and continue on here. So first thing we're doing up here is we are declaring a variable called I, and I is an integer. We are declaring an array with the maximum index of 9, and that is also an integer. And then we are also giving a worksheet variable of worksheet. Now, rather than the way we did the array before, where we had to set each variable individually, we can do that instead in a loop. So if we do that, we only have to write that one time, and instead we say ri is equal to I. And that just puts that value in the spot each time. And if we expand this out and look at this number 2 right here as we're doing it, we can see that this is executing, and now that it's 4, puts 4, 5, puts 5, etc., all the way up to 9. Now we're going to go ahead and set the worksheet as active workbook, which is this, dot worksheets. This is a new concept. This allows you to specify a specific sheet and select the name of it. So when you put it in quotes like that, you can select the name. You can also do something like this where you put a number in there instead. In fact, am I recalling correctly that it's worksheets 1? Let's take a look here. Yep. And so now WS is this worksheet. I'm going to go ahead and come back over to variable types just to show this. And now if I go ahead and select that sheet, it should bounce back over to it. And it does. So it takes us right back to that sheet 1 that I had in there. All right. Just want to put that back in there the way I had it. But again, that does show you that you can do it either way. And spelling, of course, needs to be the same and everything so it knows what you're talking about. Now, we talked a little bit about the range variable type. So right here, I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to call it my range or my RNG. I like to shorten things when I can. And I'm going to say that as range. I'm going to set that to active sheet.range. I could also do ws.range if I wanted to. And I'm going to say A1 to B2. So it's going to be these 4 cells right here. So as I go through there, now I'm going to do a for each loop. I have to give it some sort of a name. Now, I mentioned that variant is going to be used somehow, or is kind of required for one type of loop. This is what that is. This has to be a variant. So whether I declare it up a little bit higher and I say dimension decel as variant, or I do it right inside of here, doesn't matter, unless I have option explicit again. Then I have to go ahead and do that. And I'm saying in my range. So my range is this right here. And when I say each, I'm saying whatever that collection is, and you can do this with arrays, you can do this with different types of collections. I want you to apply what I'm going to tell you to each one. So in this case, I am going to have it put in some question marks. I wanted to have it put in black blocks, but VBA couldn't understand that when I tried to bring it over from character map. So going through that, again, does the second one, third one, fourth one. All right, now I'm going to clear it out because we're going to do some other fun stuff here in just a few moments. So now I have I is equal to 2. One thing to bear in mind as we come down here and we do a new loop while I is less than 10, ws.cells. If this value were 0 or I was equal to 0, I'm going to get an error message. That's going to say, hey, that won't work. I don't know what you're talking about. However, if I go ahead and change this back to I the way I had it, I'm going to go down here and I'm going to say, hey, I want you to take this cell or the value of this cell in this worksheet. So kind of when you're reading this, you can almost go backwards, or you can keep going in like you're taking off individual layers. I want you to set it to I. And then I want you to add 1. When you're doing a while loop, always remember to add, to iterate. If you do something like this and you do while I is less than 10, and you don't have this I equals I plus 1 and you let it go, most likely Excel is going to lock up. You'll have to close out of the program completely and you'll lose any unsaved work. So very important to do this. Also important lesson here or reminder to save first and save often. So here we're going to go ahead and continue on with this, and I'm going to set 3 now, 4, 5. While I'm in here, I want you to notice one thing. Right now, I have a cell selected. And when I have a cell selected, you'll notice all of this stuff disappears. It's basically saying, hey, I can't do anything when you're working on a cell. You're kind of locking everything out when you do that. So I've done this during debugging. I've selected a cell when I didn't mean to, or what have you. And then I've been like, hey, what's going on here? Just click away from it and you can continue working. So now that I have clicked away from it, this is active. I need to go back to this being active. So I'll go ahead and click on it and I will continue on with counting. So yes, kind of boring. All we did was count from 2 to 9. Okay, I'm going to go back. I'm going to set that to 2 again. Now we're going to do the exact same loop, really. The only difference is we're using a little bit different format. Instead of while and the condition and ending it with the word wend, W-E-N-D, instead we are doing do while, whatever the condition is. I'm introducing another new item here. Instead of value, which I did up here, I am doing text. And by the way, actually, let me show you one other thing here. I'm actually going to do this just to show you something. I'm going to add watch on WS. I'm going to bring that up. You can undock this stuff and you can reposition it anywhere you want to. So if I wanted to, I could put it here. I can put it off to the side, and I can bring it all the way out here, which I'm going to do here. So you can, just like you could in the Object Explorer, you could explore kind of everything. What Watches allows you to do, and same thing with locals, is it allows you to examine whatever the item is that you have in there. So if I come in here and I say, okay, WS, what's under WS? I can do all of this stuff. Okay, what's under cells? Under cells, I have all of this stuff. And so I have a column property. I have a column width property. I have a text property. And that text property is null. And I have a value 2 and a value 2 property. I have vertical alignment property. I have width. So different properties in there is my point. And so if you're ever getting something where it's not operating correctly and you're not sure why, if you go in there, you can find out exactly what everything contains and find out what's going on. One error that I've run into before, which I found kind of interesting, was when, let's see if I can get that in there correctly. I did. Okay. One error that I've run into is I had a number in there where it was this is where Excel can get a little buggy. Okay, I've had a number in there or a field in there that was something like this, but it overflowed and I didn't see everything in there, or it cut off, or it was a number but there just was not enough room, so it displayed as that. What you're going to see when you do that kind of thing is that certain properties, instead of having that number in there the way you would expect, because it's cut off, it will actually have a different value in that property. So watch out for that kind of thing. Coming back over here, what we are saying is when the length of this cell, so it's looking at this cell first because it's I, which is 2, and 1, the very first value of that. When that is greater than 0, which one character is greater than 0, I want you to keep going. And once it's 0 or less, which of course it would never be less, the length of it, but I want you to stop at that point. So when I do that, I am saying I want you to put the value, whatever you see in there, I want you to put it up here instead, and then go ahead and continue on. So let's go ahead and do that. So why would you want to do this? Me personally, I have had situations where I've had 100 items that just go down and down and down, or 1,000, or I've even worked with 50,000 items before, and just all sorts of text on there that I need to do something with. And so being able to take all of that, read it in, manipulate it, move it where I want to go, you can actually create very complex programs and get some very detailed reports just off of data. I actually had one project that I did where it was about 48,000 lines of data, and it had product lines and discounts given and the reps that took the orders and the amount of the order. And I pulled all of that out and broke that down by state. I broke it down by product line. I broke it down by rep. And so everybody was able to get an individualized report. And then you can actually even take that out and you can email that to people and do really whatever you want to do. So really the sky's the limit. If you can do it in Office, for the most part, you will be able to find a way to do it in VBA. So let's go ahead and just continue on with this little experiment that we're doing. And we'll finish up that do while loop. Now I'm going to set the variable I, which again is that integer variable, to 1. And now I'm going to do a do and then a loop while. Here's the difference. When you do just a do at the beginning, it guarantees that it is going to execute one time. When you do it at the end, there is not a guarantee that it's going to execute. Or when you do the while at the beginning, there's not a guarantee that it's going to execute if the condition is not satisfied. Okay, so now I'm going to loop while I is less than 10, and we're going to put some color on here. So I saw this a little bit earlier and I decided to play with the interior color and just see what different numbers are. So here's what I'm doing. I'm saying the color value that Excel knows, and whatever number I'm on, I'm going to take that number and multiply 3,000 and then subtract that from this number. So as I do that, kind of have some fun with it, it just puts different colors across there for me. All right, so that ends that loop because now I is not less than 10, and so it broke out of the loop. Now we also have do until. This loops everything until a condition is satisfied. So in this case, it's do until I is greater than 10. I is equal to 1 right now, therefore it is not yet greater than 10. And we can go ahead and do this a little bit differently. Now, the other thing I decided to do on this one is to get rid of these values on the side here. So first of all, I decided to start with the number 1 and then do the same thing, I times 3,000, and just add that instead. And I also decided to start with whatever the value of I is, add 1 to that. So it means that it's starting at the number 2 instead of at the number 1. And the first column of that, I'm setting the value of that to nothing. So it will just go down there and you will see it erase those numbers as I go down. So starts with that red color, and again, now we're on black. It's going to delete that, move on. Color, delete, move on. Color, delete, etc. So it goes through and does all of that until that condition is greater than 10. We are still not quite there, so it's going to execute one more time. And now we are at 10 still, so it is not yet greater than 10, but now it is, because now it is 11. So I'm going to reset that again to the number 1, and I do have an extra line in here, not sure why I left that in there, so we'll take that out here real quick. And now again, we're going to say do and then loop until. And again, this is going to guarantee that it executes once, but it may quit executing at the end after it goes through the first time. In this case, it's not going to, because we are going until I is greater than 10. Again, that's not true yet, so we'll go through and we'll do some different colors. And I know this is not pretty. I am not an expert in design, like colorful design, but I was having some fun with it. All right. So next thing, now I want to go ahead and set my range to A1 to J4. Why did I choose A1 to J4? This is A1, this is J4. I want to go ahead and look at all of that. And with that range, I want to clear contents. So this is going to disappear. All right. And then with the interior, that's all of this stuff. I want to change tint and shade to 0. That basically gets rid of it. Pattern tint and shade to 0. Really didn't need that one, but I left it in there anyway. Pattern equals XL none. So that went ahead and removed the coloring essentially. Or gave me back my grid lines, I should say. And that's all of it. That covers your basics of VBA. It also covers basically my first semester of Computer Science 101. And it gives you an idea of how to navigate through code. You can apply these concepts to other languages. You can also go ahead and stretch further with VBA, get further into it. I will be posting further videos on doing more with VBA as we look at doing CRUD applications, which is create, read, update, and delete, and we'll link into a database. We'll do SOAP requests, and we can go off to, if you have a spreadsheet with FedEx tracking numbers, it can go off to FedEx, grab some information, come back, and load all of that. So we will look at all of that in further videos. But for right now, thanks for listening and keep learning.